what gives value to anyone's life. We're speaking about the human being, is because a human being, his behavior is not dictated by instinct, but rather by choice. A person could submit to instinctive behavior, but a person is endowed with the ability to take control of his life and make choices, to do right or do wrong. And because you have that ability to suppress the temptation to do wrong and not take that initiative. If you take that initiative, you're held culpable for that unacceptable initiative. And if you do right, which you're not compelled to do right, the only reason why you did the right thing is because you chose to do so. If things in existence would be absolutely clear, right, good is good and evil is evil. If you would understand that and internalize it, what would be? There would be no context for choice. The only reason why there's a context for choice is because the world is gray at best. It's all gray. There's no black and white. But if the world were black and white, that you'd easily be able to discern between one and the other, there wouldn't be a basis for choice. And therefore, one's initiative is not attributed to himself, because basically the person has no other choice but to do what's in his best interest, because in his best interest is so obvious and so confirmed in his mind and his emotion, he would behave differently. So the value of God going to a degree into concealment, there's always a degree of concealment. Even the best of times, except for Sinai, God was in concealment. Meaning, God's presence was not the equivalent of what happened during the Red Splitting of the sea, where even the maidservant was able to point with a finger and say, that's God. This is God, I will extol him. We can't fathom what that was. But if a person would see God continuously in that context and never be distracted, because God is, as they say, in your face, because the world would be radiating with that level of God's presence, you wouldn't be able to achieve what you have to achieve. And if you can't achieve it, if man was created deficient and the only value of accomplishment is to address that deficiency, to achieve perfection, but that achieving perfection is not attributed to you, because you have no choice but to do what's obviously in your best interest. So that's not attributed to you. So therefore, God creates this so-called, this questionable state. Is it nature? Is it God? Is it powers? Whatever is it? You have to somehow overcome all these issues and make discernments to understand which path to walk. Which drum do you march by? God's drum or the world's drum? Therefore, this choice. It's very interesting. We have models of this, but that's not how we live our daily lives. We mentioned the other day, the Mishnah tells us, Pirkei Avos, there were a number of miracles which took place in the Beis Hamikdash, in the temple. On Yom Kippur, the Jews were there to witness and hear the service of the high priest of Yom Kippur. And there were so many Jews who actually attended this, and the Beis Hamikdash has a very limited area. Yet, hundreds of thousands of Jews were able to fit into this very small area, to the point that they were pressed together. You couldn't move an iota. But yet, when they heard the declaration of the high priest pronouncing God's name, the 42-letter name of God, immediately they all prostrate themselves. And the Mishnah tells us, Mishtachim Revochim, they bowed with plenty of room. when they bowed. When they stood, they were pressed. But when it's time to bow, they want the area somehow had the capacity to allow them to prostrate themselves. If you look at a Jew and you look at a Gentile, there's no question. The core of every human being is a soul. The physicality is only the context in which we function. But the core of the person is the soul. So if you look at the Jew and the Gentile, you say, well, we both have souls. Are they within the same plane? You're a composite, I'm a composite. Or the composite of the Jew is something at another dimension, not to be fathomed, and it's to be addressed despite the lack of being able to grasp it or to put your head around it. We live by that script to perfect it. So imperfection is not obvious. It's also, there's a certain concealment. The essence of the soul, the Jewish soul versus non-Jewish soul, is not obvious. It's in concealment. Even the non-Jewish soul, maybe the non-Jew is an intellectual animal. How do we know there's a spiritual core to that person? That's part of our tradition. That's how we know it. So just as God created the world in a concealed manner, in a deficient manner, it's due to his lack, due to his concealment, as we'll see in a moment. But man himself is deficient, because as much as his essence is his soul, but the way we function, only by overt choice do we function as if we have a soul. Otherwise, you function based on your inclination, and you drift in that direction wherever the current takes you. In the last blessing of the Amidah, we ask for God to bring peace upon his Jewish people. And we say, with the illumination of your countenance, or ponecho, you gave us a living Torah, and a love for doing acts of loving kindness. How did we achieve that innate ability to do loving kindness and to be knowledgeable in the Torah? With the illumination of your face, you gave us Torah's chesed. We gave us Torah's chaim, the living Torah, v'avos chesed, love of acts of kindness. What does it mean, ba'or panecha? With the countenance of your face. And we say ba'or panecha, with the illumination of that countenance. It doesn't say ba'or panecha. It doesn't say panecha, bepanecha, with your countenance. Ba'or panecha. God radiated through that radiance, illumination of that countenance. You gave us Torah's chaim v'avos chesed, the living Torah and the love for chesed. What are we referring to? We're referring to Sinai. At Sinai, God openly revealed himself to every Jew. Every Jew prophesied in awake state. So that's Or Panecho, the light of your face. You gave us Torah's chaim, v'avos chesed, and the love for indiscriminate kindness. We're all beneficiaries of that. Because all Jews, every Jewish soul was at Sinai. Every soul was touched by God's presence. That never changes. That will always be, except you could bury it. You could be in a state of denial. So we ask in the Amidah, the closing blessing of the Shemona Esrei, Borcheinu Avinu Kulanu Be'or Panecha. Bless us all together with the countenance of your face, the light of the countenance of your face, and to give us everything that's good. What are you blessed by countenance of his face? You have a room which is very dark. You barely can make out things. But as you illuminate that room, you begin appreciating what's contained within the room, especially if it contains certain objects or certain amenities. And the brighter it gets, the more obvious, it reaches a point you cannot deny it. You cannot deny the value of what you see now. With the illumination of your face, you gave us Torah's Chaim. That's the Torah itself, Vavas Chesed. That's doing acts of loving kindness between man and man. I mean, we only had appreciation of that. If there's no question whatsoever, to achieve certain milestones, you have to have a certain degree of educational orientation. You're not going to delude yourself. If you want to go to MIT, you want to go to Harvard, you have to maintain a certain average. You have to have a certain educational background, track record. And if you do, you're going in. Because if you don't have that background, they feel you're going to fail. You don't have the capacity what it takes to understand the subjects that they teach at a more advanced level. You don't have the capacity unless you come with that certain IQ or that certain academic record, which is something above the average. But if it's average, it's not to the average. How do you know if you're average or not average? Because it's the way you scored, the way you're evaluated. When God will reveal himself and we have the illumination of his countenance, what do we see? What does that do to us? It gives us a level of clarity and we can appreciate what our deficiencies are. And when you understand who God is, if you understand who God is, automatically that addresses the imperfection in yourself. We only do the mitzvos to be able to establish a commonality with God. We spiritualize ourselves. And as a result of that spiritualization, we upgrade little by little, continuously filling in the gaps. That's what it is. But once you achieve that, now you're ready for real time to have a relation with God. What about if God reveals himself to us? And God says, we have a relationship, although at this point, you haven't done anything. At Sinai, were the Jews so worthy? They were slaves in Egypt, they became idolaters. They had plenty on their record. But nevertheless, the Jews who stood at Sinai, whatever deficiencies they had, they weren't there any longer. Because deficiencies are only a result of what? Of being deficient. But if you're exposed to God's presence, there's no deficiencies. Immediately, the soul has no need other than that. And therefore we say, bring peace upon us. You on us and our Jewish people. And what should he give us? Chesed, how? Or panecha, with the illumination of his face. Because once he does that, we're locked in. We become that. That's what we want. It's more than it's a priority. It becomes a necessity because you understand how vital that piece of the puzzle is, that without the piece of the puzzle, you have no value. We find in the chapter of Tehillim, chapter 30, it's called Mizbeach Chinuch Sabayis David. David says in that chapter that if you should remove your countenance from me, I become overwhelmingly bewildered. Bewildered. It's like a person, you're on top of an iceberg and it's fully illuminated and you could know exactly where you're walking. You shouldn't get too far close to the edge because you may slip off the iceberg. You're secure. That's only if it's illuminated. What happens at nighttime where it's lacking illumination? You don't see as well. Your whole situation becomes much more precarious. When God will reveal himself, why do we have an avas chesed? Due to being exposed to the light of his countenance, we understand how essential chesed is to address our spirituality. The world turns on chesed. I mentioned that the mitzvah of you must emulate God. Of course, you can't emulate God to be a creator. God's a creator. What does it mean you should emulate God? You should behave as he does, as he's merciful, as he's righteous, as he's giving. You should do all that. As he buries the dead, as he buried Moshe Rabbeinu, as he clothed the naked, as he clothed Yaakov and Adam, the way he clothed them, we clothe also. We clothe the poor, we bury the dead, so on and so forth. That's what we do. Is God a taker or is God a giver? God doesn't take, God only gives. Soni matonis yichya. This is the way the Malbim explains it. The one who despises gifts, who never wants to be on the receiving end, only on the giving end, he will live. Why will he live? Because the Torah says, when you cleave to God, you will live eternally. Now, when you attach two things, there has to be some degree of commonality between the two of them. So if you yourself all your life were always on the giving end, never on the taking end, so you have this commonality with God that you could cleave to him because there's nothing which is not reflective of God's own behavior. Because God's always a giver. This person who's exemplary in chesed, he's always giving. He's never taking. He only takes when he rightfully has a right to take, such as earnings, that he has a right to take. But loving kindness, would you have a right to it? I prefer to turn it down, to pass on it. But we only had appreciation for that, Torah's chayv, avos chesed, a natural love for it, because we saw for the first time at that level the value of Torah itself and the value of chesed. That's interesting. You know, when a person is alive, you believe many things we have are special. Remember with our parents, you know, your mother had a favorite pot, a favorite knife, a favorite this, and your father had this. It was his favorite things. The moment they pass away, unless it has innate worth, such as gold, silver, precious metals, jewelry, or whatever, it has no. As much as your parent valued it and enjoyed it and even revered it, other people say, you know something, we have no interest. And very often you have to throw it in the trash. That's what it is. Why? Because everything is subjective. It's subject to the person himself. But what about something that's not subjective? It's just, in reality, it is what it is out there. At Sinai, God gave us an understanding of what the value is to do chesed. Something which is beneficial to you, and there's nothing which is the equivalent of it, automatically you love it. Because that is so-called your ace in the hole. That will bring you to that level of what? Of perfection. Because then you could cleave. What's the point? Proof? Because you could cleave to God. Chesed means you're giving. You're a giver. You're not a taker. Right now in the United States, many parts of the United States, there's 80% assimilation. Assimilation doesn't mean the Jews are not Jews. If the spouse is not Jewish, the woman, then the child is not a Jew. But if maternally it's a Jew, the Jew is a Jew, although the Jew may not live as a Jew, may not identify as a Jew. You can't have a greater deficiency than a Jew that's cut off from Judaism. There's no greater deficiency within existence. Because if the world was created that deficiency should be addressed, and the means to address it is here, and that person doesn't even identify as a Jew, what's the level of that deficiency? It's a deficiency which seems is never going to be addressed. Of course, the person doesn't value his Judaism, doesn't value his Jewish identity. He has no curiosity even to pursue it. That's what it is. But you realize, when the end of time, when Hashem reveals himself, all these people are going to see a new value in spirituality. And they'll understand the key to their success is this, what we're talking about. The mitzvahs, doing the will of God. Person says, yeah, I'm agnostic. What could God do for me? Okay? As they say in English, the way you make your bed, that's the way you sleep. It's up to you. Nobody's forcing anything on you. I'm happy to spend time to try to convince you that this is appropriate and proper. And it's the only way, but you have a right to reject it. So let's talk the person who observes the Torah. We walk the walk, we talk the talk. But as much as you walk the walk and talk the talk, there's still an overwhelming level of concealment. Do we see God's hand in our lives? We have glimpses, but in an obvious way. It's not obvious. You have to, as so-called, read between the lines, and you have to decipher certain things to be able to see it. It's not there. So the ones who understand that there is a God and God is in our lives, when he will reveal himself, we're going to be amazed. We only understood God to be at this level. It's amazing what level he's at. The people who don't even acknowledge God, not only they're going to be way amazed, they're going to be shocked. Because they're going to first experience something which they never experienced before. They never knew he existed. The person who always was observant, we know he exists. But what level do we observe him? What level do we respond to his service? Very minimal level. But factually, so therefore, as a result of that, when you come to the realization and you understand your purpose now, and your purpose now is going to be addressed, that's shleimus. That's achieving perfection. What is tshuva? What is repentance? We transgress deliberately, inadvertently, whatever it is. We come to a realization. What is realization? Something that somehow you glossed over, or you weren't aware it even existed. If it's done inadvertently, you realize it is. So what is it? How does one achieve perfection? Through realization. What's realization? Realization is revelation. Something you've come to a degree of revelation, and maybe through your own initiative, but there is something has been revealed to you within yourself, and therefore that realization causes you to have remorse. You regret you did the wrong thing. I'll give you an example. Person eats something, doesn't realize it's tainted. Then he doesn't feel well. And they take a blood test, they say, you know something, what you ate definitely was tainted, and you have to get on a certain kind of antibiotic. Why is the person taking the antibiotic? Because he doesn't feel well. He's come to the realization that what he ate it doesn't conform with his function. It's taking him down. So you come to the realization. You're realizing something that you didn't realize before. Now you realize what you did is a diminishment. So tshuva is a realization of the imperfect to perfect. Tshuva is a mitzvah. Man is prone to fail. Wherever you turn, we're failing. But whenever you start making the corrections, I only failed because of my lack of awareness. Or even if I'm aware, I didn't fully internalize how wrong it was. So there's always a degree of ambiguity to it, which is part of concealment. That's the reality.